Tonight is a great opportunity to get our message out there to the public about flood protection and the state of the system and hurricane readiness for this particular season.
I have some questions that were posed to me by constituents, so I'd love to air those out and have people come up and answer them. One question that came up quite frequently was, we have these large, beautiful, giant pumps at the mouths of those three canals in New Orleans, and people want to know what was the criteria for when we cut those on. So whoever can answer that question, please come up now and kind of answer that question as far as, because obviously many people are aware of the pump stations within the city that were not working, and people want to know what was the criteria for cutting on those exterior pumps. So come up and answer that, that'd be great. Or lift that mic really high.
Hi, my name is Brett Hare. I'm a project manager with the Corps of Engineers. And I have responsibility on our side, the federal side, for the Lake Pontchartrain and vicinity project. After Hurricane Katrina, we constructed what we call interim closure structures at the mouths of each of the outfall canals. And that consists of a pump station and a gated structure. And during normal times of the year, when there's no tropical system approaching, those gates remain open. And as rainfall is pumped into the outfall canals, it just flows through those gated structures into the lake. So during this past rainfall event, the gated structures were open. There was no reason to close those gated structures because we can only pump out what gets pumped into the outfall canals. If a tropical storm comes, we close the gates, and then we pump out the water into Lake Pontchartrain as it's pumped into the outfall canals by the Sewage and Water Board.
Just to kind of summarize that, I think the issue is that when you have torrential rainfall across the city and the outfall canals themselves also fill, whether it's from rainfall or from water being pumped from the city into the canal, then those pumps cut on. Since the water was not being pumped into the canal, the large pumps weren't there to pump the water out of the canal. So to answer the question from my constituents who might be watching or in the audience, those pumps weren't cut on because there wasn't water being pumped into the canal. So that answers that question. I appreciate that succinct answer. I had some cards. Are there any more cards? Yeah, okay, we have cards. We have some cards that were given to me during earlier presentations. I've been handing out those cards to the respective people. Why don't you have this one? Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So the question is CPRA's breakdown. I believe it says skills 80-20, and can that be dedicated for local?
That's my question. It's about the diversions versus the coastal barriers and the coastal restoration master plan and the breakdown of the funding. My understanding was like 80% for diversions, 20% for construction of barriers, and what level is the funding overall for the master plan? And I know locals prefer the barrier islands, so is there a way to break off a piece that satisfies that?
The question is the breakdown. If I understood you correctly, what's the breakdown between restoration and flood protection? And he's also asking about diversions versus barrier island projects. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay, so again, our master plan was approved. Our 2017 master plan was recently approved. I will tell you that the breakdown between flood protection and restoration is about 50-50, okay? To answer your question regarding the diversions, okay, there are different funding sources that we have. It was, as everybody knows, we had the BP oil spill, and this is some of the money that the state's gonna receive. But those funding sources are dedicated for a certain impact in a certain area. I will say that we're currently working on the diversion. We have identified the funding sources for those diversions, and it's a combination between NIFWIF and NERDA, okay? That's where the funding source is gonna come. So we also have what we call the Go Mesa funding, right? That money's gonna come in. We anticipate that money will be used for flood protection too, for the state.
Basically, the state has a master plan that is a gigantic, beautiful master plan that is wholly not funded. So basically, part of what CIPRA does is they do triage. as money comes available, they have to look at which projects are ready to go, provide the funding of those projects move forward. But the Go Mesa is a great example. The Senator Mary Landrieu, when she was in Congress, was able to secure us to get our portion of the offshore revenues from oil development. Both administrations, both the previous presidential administration and this current one, both at certain times threatened to revoke that money. If that money doesn't come, then we can't do coastal restoration projects. Now, there was some questions early on when that money was approved that there were concerns the legislature would use that money to patch the budget. In response to that, at the time, the legislature actually passed laws to prevent us from messing with that money to balance the budget, because though the budget restoration is very important, coastal restoration is essential. So that money for Go Mesa is dedicated to flood control structures and flooding, but like I said, we're just starting to possibly get that money, and as we're starting to get it, you already have different groups who are trying to undermine that money coming through. So to Ignacio's point, he was just simply stating, like, listen, we have a plan. I hate to use the big beautiful plan. We have a plan for coastal restoration. It's finding the money to pay for it, and that's going to be the ongoing challenge with making sure we have the money to pay for it and making sure it continues to be a priority. We've got a couple of more questions. One question, I'll get a couple of these up here right now. We have a great question. Someone asked, would it be possible for us to make presentations to neighborhood groups? I am available, and I will happily make presentations to neighborhood groups. I know Southeastern Flood Protection East, we can get them there. They're located locally. It's a little more difficult with the Corps and with the CIPRA, because CIPRA is located in Baton Rouge. What I'd prefer to do is, if there are groups that want to hear from those groups, I'd prefer to kind of have a group of neighborhood groups meet at once to make fewer of those meetings, to try and get them down here for them. Like if we can get groups of 3 or 4 together just to centralize them, I'm happy to do that. But all these guys are here to provide information. They love to hear from me and say they have to provide information, but they all provide information. Joe Hassinger is the president of Southeastern Flood Protection District. He actually lives in New Orleans, which is something you have to say, because a lot of members of Southeastern Flood Protection do not live in New Orleans. And it's been an ongoing fight. I know I'm not going to put Joe on a spot, but it's an issue I've had for years after we created Southeastern Flood Protection East. Originally, it was completely populated with people who did not live here. And the challenge we had was that, in my opinion, there was no sense of urgency, because when a flood event happened in New Orleans, it was academic. It was, oh, there's flooding. Let's go look at what happened and see how it went. I'm going to fly back to California now. We now have a few more members that are from New Orleans. Joe is the president. He lives, I think, a spitting distance from here. When there is a flood event, everyone hears from Joe over it. And that's the way it should be, because Southeastern Flood Protection was meant to replace our local levee district, and we need local people on there to represent local interests. So I appreciate Joe being here. He's always been a great help, but I am more than willing, if you go through my office, website, whatever, if you want me to come to your neighborhood group, your political action committee, whatever you want, if you want people to come provide information, because I know it's difficult to plan these meetings because you never know what's going to happen. The city council may drop a meeting at the last minute. You may have issues getting a babysitter or whatever. If you need other opportunities for information, we're more than happy to do that. So that answers that question. There's a question here, I think this is probably a core question, in regards to the drain issue. And I think it's part of that might be there was the concern regarding, this is a Public Works question. I don't know if Public Works is here. Maybe someone from Sewage and Water Board. Oh, somebody Public Works. This is your question? Okay. So the question is regarding the drains, right?
First, where are they? So on my street, there's one drain on the corner of Franklin and Casey. And then, that's it. There's not even a drain across it.
I think that's a great question. Maybe we should get some Sewage and Water to come and kind of explain how they establish where to put drains. That's the question, right?
Are they clean? I don't know. But then, because the street hasn't been redone in 29 years, and it's nothing but patch upon patch upon patch, then the water slides in people's driveway and lawns, and there's this much water.
Okay, so the two questions are, I think the bigger one, which is a good one, is how does the Sewage and Water Board or the city establish where they put drains on streets? Because some streets will have 2 drains and some streets will have 1 drain. And
some have in the middle of the block.
Right.
And I heard there was money for cleaning the drains. And I heard that the drains were not cleaned. People go to sleep instead of cleaning the drain
The drain cleaning, I think, is a public works question, and I'll have someone there public works, but as far as where the drains are located, I think the sewage and water would someone should be able to speak on just generally how you locate where drains go.
Thank you, Senator Morrell. My name is Ron Spooner, Chief of Engineering for the Sewage and Water Board of New Orleans. Ma'am, to answer your question, as far as the design of the drainage system, there are design parameters in place by the Department of Public Works as well as the Sewage and Water Board on the location of drains, and it's pretty much based upon the design, pretty much design criteria. The number of catch basins associated with that. Some of the references that people use is DOTD is a very baseline reference that people use. So pretty much to answer your question in a nutshell, it's just based upon the design parameters of that system. Many of the streets themselves, especially in New Orleans East, were designed by the developers when they put those roadways in. So they use that design criteria to do that. And while I'm up here, Senator, there was another question here someone had with citizens concerning low water and loss of pressure. Just to let you know, the Sewage and Water Board is working diligently to work on the deficiencies in the drainage system, but I wanted to say that the drinking water is safe and the sanitary sewer system is safe, part because of the power generation for that is that the water system is powered by a combination of electricity as well as steam power. So the power plant is a steam-powered power plant. We have boilers in there, so we have large water distribution pumps that we use a combination of steam pumps, the pump water distribution system, as well as electric pumps. So just to answer that question, your drinking water is safe and it is clean. Thank you.
The issue is this, and I think the lakefront and Gentilly are kind of a great example. There's always an assumption that when most drains were put in, the city put the drains in. In most instances, and I know this because I built a house 4 years ago, when whoever built the houses on the street built the houses, they kind of put the drains where that street said the designs for that street to put the drains. So I guess the question is, the answer to your question, which isn't a great answer, is though there was some input by city agencies when those drains were put in, they were put in by developers who were told put the drain here. And as we continue to build more streets and build more houses, it was kind of, I mean, unless we have some different arrangements, kind of willy-nilly. And when the system is complete, they're occasionally trying to rehash those things to develop the system, but when developers, I know from when I built my house, we built our house, we had to build the sidewalks, and we had to figure out how we were going to deal with the drain. And that's something that happened 5 years ago, so it's still kind of happening. So overall, I think to answer your question, it's a very loose system on where drains go. Though these systems were built willy-nilly at the time, if you're going to improve the system, we need to have an overall review of all these systems and figure out how to make them all work together, because you can't quite just keep patching it. As far as questions, yeah. The cards are in the back, but you know what? We can have someone bring the cards up and start passing them down the aisles if you guys want to sit in your seats. I see a question card back there. Can someone pick it up for me? Bring it up front. Bring his questions up. Thank you. We had a question, I think, and actually, or Bob can answer it. We had one question, the big one. Let's do the big one first. There's a question regarding weren't these outfall canals, the big outfall canals and pumps, meant to replace the interior pumps? And I think Bob can answer that. Can you read the question so that everybody can hear it?
I will. Okay. Bear with me here. So the question is this: weren't the permanent pump stations built with deep water intakes that would allow them to replace the old Sewage and Water Board pump stations in the future?
I'll read the question. Okay. Weren't the permanent pump stations built with deep water intakes that would allow them to replace the old sewage and water pump stations in the future? Considering the current condition of these old pumps and power generation, isn't it time to revisit converting the system to an option 2 system, as in making those outflow pumps serve a backup to the Sewage and Water Board's aging system?
Those of you who were around here when there was talk about the design and how these new stations were going to be designed may remember there was a lot of talk about how should we do this. You know, should we eliminate the old pump stations now and build a gravity system all the way out to the lake, and then use the new pump stations at the lake as, you know, the new system, the new pump stations, and just abandon the old pump stations? And there was some thought put into that, and it was considered. At the time, it was realized that the cost for doing that just was not available then. And so as kind of a compromise, what the Corps did was they said, well, you know what? We're going to go ahead and design these new pump stations at the lake with the ability for in the future for some other entity, or maybe even the Corps, if they ever had the funding to do so, to come in, change the configuration of the existing pump stations owned by the Sewage and Water Board in the outfall canals, and then be able to use those new pump stations at the lake as the primary pumping stations to get the water out of the city. So the capability is there, has been built into those pump stations. I think every now and then it's a very good idea, I believe, to go back and revisit that idea to see is the time right yet? Does the benefit cost ratio become greater than 1? And if so, then we find the funding to do that and make that happen. But the possibility has been built into those stations to do that work if we ever choose to do that in the future and find the funding to do that.
There was a question saying, would I file legislation mandating a quarterly sewage and water board report on inspection and maintenance and modernization of our drinking system? Absolutely. We've had a problem across the state on drinking water. There are several areas of the state, not just New Orleans, we've had to wholly go in as a state and replace entire drinking water systems throughout the state on multiple occasions. So as many of you know, we had a whole host of systems that were compromised by that brain-eating amoeba throughout the state. A lot of that happened because those systems were aging. You saw a lot of compromised water delivery pipes throughout the state. And so there definitely, we had that issue pop up in St. Bernard, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. And at that time I passed legislation that mandated that health and hospitals go through and review all the systems. And that is around we found out there were 3 or 4 other compromised systems that weren't properly using the proper combination of chemicals to make sure the brain amoeba was not placed in the system. So I think you can't really do enough to make sure drinking water remains safe for the public. I think that it's hard to argue in legislation that I've passed in the past. There's really been no pushback on having additional layers of oversight on drinking water. The only challenge that comes with drinking water maintenance and those reviews is cost. Obviously, the state's broke, so they're always trying to find different ways to push the money to other people. And we have done a horrendous job over the course of my tenure there, but also the history of the state, of funding the Department of Environmental Quality at all. So that requirement typically falls upon DHH, and it's mainly an issue of doing cost, but there's no reason if you're operating a robust sewage and water board system that you should not be able to bear the cost of having a quarterly or at least a biannual maintenance of those systems to make sure the drinking water is safe, because that is one of the most important reasons why government exists. I believe I handed out some other questions. There's one question here.
It was about drinking water, but it was really about the flooding and how the sewage and water board communication with the public. And so it really was in reference to Senate Bill 47 and 303, and kind of in retrospect, how do we really engage the public in terms of the maintenance, the modernization, the inspection, and the performance of our flood protection system. And so I'm wondering if there's more oversight in response to the flooding that we can do from a state legislative perspective.
I think that at the end of the day, having more oversight is not a bad thing. And if anything, we need to find ways to have more oversight. As many of you may or may not be aware, I've actually already put together legislation putting a city council member back on the Sewage and Water Board to have additional oversight, but I don't think that goes far enough. Honestly, there's been a lot of conversation, both offline and online, about the privatization of Sewage and Water Board. That would be a disaster. When you talk about drinking water for citizens of any community, privatization is the worst possible thing you can do. As we saw in Flint, Michigan, whenever you privatize anything and you put someone in possession of an entity that's an essential entity with a group that's got a profit-driven motive, inevitably what happens is that you see a corner cut to make more money. So if anything, we should do more efforts to make sure that there is more participation, more oversight, and more reporting by any entity, not just Sewage and Water Board of New Orleans, but all water systems. There should be a quarterly, I always say biannual or quarterly because really, oftentimes from the legislative level, you can't just solve a problem in New Orleans, you gotta solve a problem statewide. And though a system like New Orleans or Jefferson, they are more robust and could probably do or respond to quarterly reports. Whenever you're doing a statewide legislation, you have to make sure that both the robust, most financially secure system and the most small, poor town system, they're all addressed in similar legislation. So I agree. I think legislation could address that issue. We could have more oversight. We can require quarterly, biannual, depending on the size of possibly of the system, how many times they have to report and do those reports and publicly make those reports available. So I agree with you. I think I can absolutely do that. And like I said, I'm going to give the city council the opportunity to put themselves back on the sewage and water board if that's what they want. Okay. Who do we call in the event of a drain failure? My blocks flood every time it rains and not just last week. All right, sewage and water board, you're up on that one. And I guess the issue becomes that if the answer is not y'all, if it is Department of Public Works, I think we need to start delineating who's responsible for what. So, yeah. So this is the drainage one. There you go. I want to use the mic.
Sure. Hello, my name is Hayne Rainey. I'm with the Sewage and Water Board, Manager, Intergovernmental Relations. To address this question regarding drain failure, it's a combination between the Department of Public Works and Sewage and Water Board. Today, the New Orleans City Council took action to appropriate just over $33 million to repair 15,000 catch basins, as well as a number of drain lines. So that will improve what we have seen regarding drainage after the rain events of 8/5 and 7/22. That work will be expedited over the course of the next few weeks, so that will address that. This question is regarding the Pontilli Neighborhood Association. When will the street department clean the storm drains along Congress Drive in my neighborhood? They have never been cleaned out of the city. They are full of trash. That's an excellent question, and I will look right into that, and I will elevate that up to the sanitation department, as well as looking at Public Works to make sure that's on their list, and that Sewage and Water Board is aware as well.
Honestly, one of the primary complaints, and as things have developed, I've collected more and more information. We have a huge problem with contractors and the refuse they put into the catch basins. The reality is that when you hire someone to cut your grass, they're supposed to bag the grass. What happens is that individuals you hire to cut the grass, some of them will take a blower and just blow the grass into the catch basin. That's actually illegal. They're not supposed to do that, but they all do. So I think that to address that point, we're probably going to have to develop legislation both on the state and city level to increase the penalties. I will tell you, Pat Connick, who's a legislator, passed a bill. I don't know if you've seen these signs saying that the fine for throwing trash out on the highway is $5,000. Believe it or not, everyone laughed at Pat when he passed that bill. The amount of trash they picked up on the highway dropped by 75% across the state. Because people driving through are like, oh man, I don't want to be the guy that gets caught by that one state trooper. The point being that that's one of the situations where we know who's doing this. When it comes to the grass and the vegetation, that's literally contractors doing that because they don't want to bag grass. You pay them to bag the grass, and the people at the golf course should absolutely be bagging the grass because I promise you they're billing for it. Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to get to the bottom of that, but to your point, it's a problem citywide, and we're probably going to have to see whether it's at the state level or local level, we pass legislation regarding that because everyone, I mean, New Orleans, the nature of our climate, our grass is cut sometimes twice a week by somebody, whether it's us or somebody else. It's one of those things where it's a quality of life issue. We have to address it because it's adding to the problem. When it comes to stuff like that, these are things that we've kind of left out there for a very long time. People have gotten away with it for a very long time, so it's kind of a bad habit, and we have to figure out ways to break that bad habit because I'll tell you, people sometimes forget you can only really clean the top of your catch basin. When stuff gets clogged below a certain point, you cannot clean it yourself. And I think what Mr. Haney just said a second ago was that's something that they've been allocated new money to do. I'm sure there'll be tremendous oversight in doing that, but the catch basins are kind of the first thing that has to be fixed for a flood control structure. No matter how many drains you have, if they're not draining, it doesn't work. We have a couple other questions. I think I had some. There was one on climate change. I think Ignacio's going to answer.
So the question is, given the prospect of climate change and its importance on the severity of storms, is a 100-year protection system good enough for New Orleans? And then it says, I believe it says Holland's protection is much higher. It's a much higher level, maybe for a 10,000-year event. All right, so you know, Holland, their surge height is much lower than what we have here. So that's why they have a higher year event, 10,000 year event protection. Ours, on the other hand, is for 100 year. And some of the structures, we had some of the hardened structures are actually, they have what we call structural superiority, which is a little bit high. It was built higher, 2 foot, if I'm correct, right, Brett? For the protection. So you know, this system gets evaluated every 10 years. Okay, we're going to do the hydraulics all over again, because that's how we're going to report back to FEMA to make sure that the elevations and the protection is up to par, so your insurance rates don't go up. Then, in other words, we have to keep it at a certain level every year that goes on. So that study, I believe, is 2023, when we have to finish that report, and that's going to be an effort between all of the levee districts and CPRA to get this study done, so we can prove to FEMA that the levees are up to the elevation that they need to be. If they are not up to that elevation, then we're going to have to raise these levees. Again, please keep in mind that levees settle, you have sea level rise, you have subsidence. It's a combination of a lot of things here. Climate's changing. We do the best we can with the science we have available today. I hope I answered the question, and if not, please stand up.
Okay, just to add a little bit to that, and that was a good question, because you know, one of the things that people were criticized for before Katrina was that, you know, we just weren't looking far enough ahead. And so obviously it's clear to us that as things change, we need to be aware of what those changes are and take the necessary action. And we are doing that. If you take a look at the projects that we have underway right now, we talked a little bit earlier. You know, the Corps has developed this new system for the city. Turned that over to us. Some of these levees we've had for only 3 or 4 years. We're already raising those levees. You know, we've got 11 miles along the lakefront in East Jefferson. We're raising those levees 1 to 2 feet now. We have levees out in New Orleans East. We're getting ready to raise out there because we've already recognized that we're experiencing some subsidence, and we know that sea level rise is going to take place. And so we need to try to do the best that we can to stay ahead of that curve. And that's only to keep abreast of what Congress gave us in the way of protection, which was that so-called 100-year level of protection. I will say this too, you know, sometimes the best of intentions have unintended consequences, and you know, that's really true about the National Flood Insurance Program. You know, it's a great program, and it's a program that we desperately need here in this area, because we need flood insurance. But when it was originally started, they did something that really kind of gave everybody the idea that 100-year level of protection was the gold standard, and that's what we should go for. Because when NFIP came along, National Flood Insurance Program came along in the 60s, they had to make a decision as to what it was they were going to use as their measuring stick for allowing people to get insurance at cheap rates. And they picked the 100-year level of insurance, 100-year level of protection as that yardstick to measure things by. It's an actuarial type thing, okay? It is not a true safety type of criteria. And we've kind of lost sight of that over the years. And And so, you know, when Congress authorized all this work on the new system, you know, that was still some of that left over, and that's why I really believe that it was set at that 100-year level of protection. You know, one of our stated goals, part of our vision and our mission statement, is to not be satisfied with just a 100-year level of protection, and to do whatever we can to raise that up over time and to make sure that we certainly don't lose any. And we take that seriously. You know, we're keeping an eye on our levees. We have to survey those levees once every, is it 3 years, Ignacio? Report that up the line to people so we know where they are at. And then when we have the funding, we take the necessary action.
There is a catch basin without a top on my block. We've had a vehicle get stuck in it months ago, and the sewage and water board only put a barrel on top of it. During the flood, my neighbor fell in the drain, injured herself since the barrel moved. Is there a system for prioritizing catch basin repairs? I called in the situation again. Right after the flood, the case number is 713969. So I think we'll take that. All right. Do you want to comment on it?
I'm going to take it. We're going to get this fixed.
Okay. We have. Okay, this is a good question. This is a question from the local 1846 Carpenter Union. Why aren't we, Louisiana, working with our local unions to repair and rebuild our city? If we live here, we would have been more concerned with protecting our own. The money will be spent here at home. I think, is there a specific, what's on it? Is there a specific part, like what particular thing are you talking about as far as building?
We are trained. We're trained workers as carpenters. You have skilled workers here in the city of Louisiana, just like the gentleman up front that lives here within the city. If we are here, we know what our problems are. You can keep the money here within our city because we have skilled workers. That's all trades. I am a carpenter here. I do not work for the Sewage and Water Board, but we have lots of skilled people within our facility that can do that work. But we're privatizing all the work and sending out to contractors that do not live here. So therefore, they're not concerned with whether or not our street floods after they go to Mississippi, Arkansas, wherever they go. They have no concern that we're underwater. They're only concerned when they come back here and make money. We see our money funneling out of this city each and every day. When we see the interstates full at 5 o'clock in the evening, when they're going home to their parishes where they're spending their money, and they're coming into cities early in the morning. I can't stand going to work out in other parishes and have to make $25, $30 an hour when I cannot make it here, and I am a skilled worker. We need more of our work here with our people here. We have skilled laborers. There's all trades, welders, carpenters, brick masons. We have the qualified people here. We need you as our senator to represent us, to get in place on paper to get our people to work here in the city of Louisiana. Because if we're here working, I'm more than sure a lot of our money won't be going outside of other parishes.
I 110% agree with you. I work very closely with all of my union partners. It's part of the reason why my lobby score is 24%. So believe you me, I've authored legislation, I've supported legislation trying to do those things, and I will continue to do so. The challenge we always have, and it's kind of the structure of the way that before any of us were born, they situated Louisiana as a state, is that we prevent local government from doing certain things and reserve those rights to the state level, knowing that those people on the state level cannot do enough to help their city. I'll give you a great example. When you talk about things like allowing policies that allow cities to give preference to their local companies and local workers, we fight that fight in Baton Rouge annually on that. Because everything we try to do in Baton Rouge that gives preference, especially for New Orleans, is a dogfight every year. Even the stuff that we currently have on the books, like the living wage ordinance that was passed at City Hall. We have to fight tooth with the fight. This past year, because they tried to remove the ability for cities, even when it came to their own local workers, to set what a living wage is. So I hear you, I'm there, I got my wonderful annual lobby F, and I'll continue to fight for that as your senator. I will continue to fight for that. And I think to your point, there's plenty of things we can do locally. There's more we need to do locally, because when I'm up there in Baton Rouge and we're fighting, there's 146 legislators, and less than 25 of those are from the New Orleans area. So when we're trying to do things that protect New Orleans from a state level, it's an uphill battle. We do it, we fight all the time over it, but we do it. When you see success, like I'll point to Councilmember Brassett's living wage ordinance, it's local driven. You have to do it from the bottom up, because from the top up it doesn't work. And what happens is that when Jared passed the living wage ordinance, I'm kind of going off topic, I apologize, other cities then saw it and started trying to pass living wage ordinances. So if you're gonna do that, at times, you gotta start locally. I'll continue to fight for it on the state level, and I'll continue to get my Fs, but I'll continue to fight for the state level because that's what I'm elected to do. So I hear what you're saying, I agree with you. I think honestly, one of the biggest failures we had as a government was after Katrina, when we started doing the first recovery efforts. This was way before my time, before I was elected. When all those companies came in from out of the state to begin the rebuilding of New Orleans, we lost all that revenue. And when you look at other areas, whether it be New York and New Jersey after Superstorm Sandy, whether it was Mississippi after Katrina, they did the opposite. They said, we're gonna prioritize all the local firms, and then if there's excess they can't do, then we'll go outside of it. That was a fundamental failure of government, and you're 100% correct. Ms. Riley, you have a question? You said you want me to read the question and you do some additional stuff after it, or you just want to ask a question?
I can just ask.
Okay.
So I just attended the city council meeting, the special meeting on trying to tackle this flooding situation. And forgive me, I got here late. So if this has been addressed, I apologize. It was reported that there are 65,000 catch basins in the city of New Orleans. 65,000, and that's to help keep the city from flooding. There have only been 250 catch basin repairs since all of this outstanding flooding has happened. And they have identified 15,000 to be cleaned out and repaired so that we can get to a safe level of flood protection. That is very concerning, from 65,000 to, and they don't even know the number that they need to give attention to, because according to the official report, that's going to cost $50 million just to assess it. My concern is, and it's really as a request to you, and I'd like to hear your take as the state representative, because at many levels this can be addressed, and I don't want this to get put in the bucket of it's a local issue. Billions of dollars have come to this city in particular for rebuild since Hurricane Katrina, and some of that money was to go to infrastructure. Would you, as the representative, assist this community by requesting an investigation to find out where that money has went? Because what's happening right now, where that money has gone. Because what's happening right now is the taxpayers of New Orleans are asked to give another $22 million just to Band-Aid address those 15,000 catch basins, and they don't know what they're going to find once they start digging to repair. We're talking about the dirt and the mud and the roots and all of that stuff, so you really don't know what you're looking to find once you get invested in that. So as the state representative, and when we're thinking in terms of accountability, they're working on a fix for the current issue, but we really need to understand better where those dollars have been allocated, because reports are telling us that dollars were allocated for this particular reason, and we can't seem to get a answer on where that money went. Would you help us find that answer?
Absolutely. I think the challenge right now that we've heard, as many of you know, last year we had a request to renew a millage that dealt with drainage that passed the city pretty overwhelmingly. And I think the challenge that really came out of this recent event is people are very frustrated that when we are asked to do certain things, we do our part, but then we don't know what we're getting for it. And I think that in regards to the fact, when you're talking about that many catch basins have not been cleaned, that much money being required just to see what's not been cleaned, that's a heck of a leap of faith for people to make. So whether we want to do that through the state inspector general, whether we want to do that by legislative, the head of the committees that would oversee the sewage and water board would be the local and parochial committees. There is a chairman in the House, I believe it's Representative Ed Price. In the Senate, it's Yvonne Dorsey. I'm just saying from the state level, these are the different authorities that have oversight that can trigger oversight to ask the questions you're asking. So from a state perspective, there are authorities that can do that, and I am commit to you that I will have those authorities step in and ask those questions, because those are the authorities from the state level that can do that oversight. From a federal level, there's a federal representative who is water. Federal level is a federal representative who interacts with those agencies. These are the agencies that I interact with are like the state inspector general and the legislative auditor. The legislative auditor has some problems right now, so I'm not really looking to have him be the person doing this investigation. So I pledge to you that I will commit that I'll speak to the state inspector general, Stephen Street, and I will meet with the two chairs of the committees. I've already been in contact with Ms. Yvonne Dorsey on the Sewage and Water Board, and they have oversight authority because, as many of you may or may not realize, the Sewage and Water Board, on paper, is still a state agency. So they have oversight and they can trigger oversight over it. So I agree with you. Before we go to citizens to ask for additional money, we have to really have an accounting of how money's been spent.
Mr. Coleman asked when are Sewage and Water Board going to clean out the drainage canals. Specifically, I can give you the August drainage canal clearing schedule. Alamaster Canal, Huntley Canal, Donner Canal around DPS station number 11, Norman Canal along Louisiana Highway 406, Morrison Canal, and Janky Canal. Now, as part of the effort in the aftermath of the floods of 8-5, and the subsequent deficiencies that have been found with Sewage and Water Board's drainage systems, all of the canals are going to be assessed for their true drainage capacity, and so we can have an accurate accounting of exactly what we can communicate regarding the level of risk for flood events. I know typically our system has been able to handle a typical summer rainfall, which is about 1 to 2 inches. In the events of 8-5, it was approximately from 5 to 9.5 inches in 3 hours, which overwhelmed our system. It would overwhelm any system. There's no one has the design to be able to handle that. However, the deficiencies that have been identified between, as Mayor Landrieu has stated, between manpower, pumps, and power in our power plant, those are all being addressed right now. That's why Mayor Landrieu declared an emergency. That's why Governor John Bell Edwards did the same, and emergency resources are being applied right now. We are communicating daily on this to the public to keep them informed. And one person that's here right now is our Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, Aaron Miller, who can give you some context around specifically, as this town hall was to discuss, hurricane preparedness, so we can keep that in context with the knowledge that we know now about our drainage system. Yes, sir.
I'm in transportation. I have the advantage of most people that drive all over the city. I watch your vacuum truck clean out the basins, catch basins, but what they're not doing is back flushing the drain pipe. Clean the basin out, but the drain pipe, what the problem is with the grass and the mud that have accumulated over the many years. The other suggestion is, if you let the neighborhood know, the community, hotspots, streets that flood, that's where your focus should be. And third, I watched the guys clean the drainage on the overpasses and bridges. They pressure wash them, but they don't pick up the debris. So it goes right back to the catch basin. You could count the grass on the overpass. So you know it. Grass growing, that's dirt. And you know, I mean, just say it for the sake of saying it, it's too much not doing the job we pay people to do.
Yeah.
Doing them accurate, doing them right the first time. You have to keep coming back, getting the dirt out that you didn't pick up.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Yes, sir. I have noted that, and we'll pass it along. Thank you.
This is actually a really good question. The question is, who do we call in the event of a drain failure? My block floods every time and it rains, and not just last week. I will tell you that. What's that? You answered that? Okay, it says anonymous. Oh, it's that. Okay, but.
So that was my question, and I wanted to let you know that I'm 2 lanes right in front of the apartment building.
Right.
Close apartment building at Salcedo and South Lopez. Literally, South Lopez is the first block that will always flood. No matter how light the rain is, no matter how heavy the rain is, cars are always stalled on that block, flooded and everything. So even during 8-5 and 722, it was just another day on South Lopez and South Salcedo.
That's right.
And it's just something that people there always have to deal with. So while the people who are parking inside of the parking garage for the apartment building, while their cars are getting flooded, they are completely stranded in this building because now they cannot exit because all of the neighboring streets around them are completely underwater.
Well, I pulled this question because I want to add some stuff to it. I think number one, I think for many people, 311 has become the catch-all for all problems. I think that's not appropriate. I think that when you have a problem like rampant street flooding, that really is priority information, because one of the complaints you saw at all the council meetings, I think everyone would agree, it's very frustrating for the people who are in a flooded area to not have someone to report to, but it's equally frustrating for drivers trying to navigate the city to not know where to go. I know there's been some efforts to try and have real-time reporting of where street flooding is, but there has to be almost a separate prioritization of where to report these hot spots during a flood event. And for better or worse, when you have a catch-all solution like 311, your call regarding your street flooding is competing with the call for the person whose trash wasn't picked up that day. So a recommendation I've already made to several council members is 311 cannot be the catch-all. It can't be. 311's like where you call when you don't call 911. And because of that, it gets overloaded all the time with information. Some of it pertinent, it's just not life-threatening information. And there has to be something between that. Something where if during a flood event you see a catch basin explode because it has no drainage, and water is knee-deep, people are going down in canoes, and people are stranded in their buildings. I mean, there's so many personal life circumstances. You have no idea what each person in that building's experiencing. There might be someone there who's a 22-year-old college student. There might be somebody there who has dialysis that day. You just don't know. So I do think, and I made a suggestion to council people since the last event, that you have to figure out something different than 311, because it cannot be the solution to everything, because it's not really working in that regard. So I agree with you. I want to comment on that because I've had that experience as well. We have other questions? Oh yeah, come on. Do you want to come up here and give some comments?
Sure. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you. As was mentioned, my name is Aaron Miller, and I'm the director of the city's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. And one of the things in particular that I wanted to talk about is, we're in hurricane season with these drainage problems that have come to light. And I wanted to assure everybody that our office, between the Governor's Office of Homeland Security, FEMA has been in town this week discussing with us what these impacts may have on hurricane season and vulnerabilities during hurricane season. As the Sewage and Water Board continues to do assessments, and as we continue to have individuals who are in there assessing the reliability and redundancy of power, reliability and redundancy of drainage, we're taking a close look at those things, and we encourage everyone. We say it all the time, and I know Senator Morrell says it constantly at the beginning of hurricane season. Have your hurricane plan together and be well aware of the steps you're going to take, because some of these vulnerabilities, as was noted, in a normal rainstorm are only going to be exacerbated in the event that there's a tropical event. So we're working hard on that, and it's our commitment that we're going to make sure that between our offices, our partners, particularly at Levy District and the Corps of Engineers, have been with us all week discussing this, that we are taking a hard look at this, and we are going to make sure that we do everything to keep the public safe and informed as to the risks that may be associated during hurricane season.
My question is to the Corps. This area that flooded in the Tremere area, Orleans, Broad, they were all mainly evacuation roads, and if a hurricane would have occurred, people wouldn't have been able to get out of here. The other part of that is the pumps that were placed at pumping station number 6, which is Jefferson and Orleans. They were secondhand pumps. They were bought from Florida. Why did we buy secondhand pumps after Katrina?
Evacuation roads, okay, no, evacuation. Right. Just to let you know, and this is with all the agencies, the evacuation plans call for having the people out of harm's way before tropical storm force winds get here. So you're talking 36 to 72 hours before a storm makes landfall, everyone should be gone. So you won't have those big rain bands coming in while people are still trying to get out of the city. You shouldn't. They'll be shutting the roads down.
The mayor, during Katrina, said everybody had to be out by 6 o'clock. The rain was falling. It took 9 hours just to get the rain.
Yeah, and I think since then they've got the contraflow going, and I mean, I can't answer all those questions, but the idea is you get everyone out before you have the streets start flooding.
And to that point, I think one of the groups that wasn't able to be here tonight was Department of Transportation. When it comes to the evacuation routes, they have a lot of oversight, and I think that I'm happy. I know Representative Bagneris and I will work with DOTD on resolving that, because they are the ones in charge of the evacuation routes. They are the ones in charge of contraflow, and there is some serious concerns. I think the last time we had to utilize contraflow, it worked okay, but the previous times were a disaster. So I think that that's something that I'll work with you, Mr. Bagneris. We'll figure out with DOTD what to do with those evacuation routes, because they are the ones that are responsible for maintaining them. As far as the evacuation routes are concerned, you had a question about a pump being secondhand?
After Hurricane Katrina, the Corps constructed what we call interim closure structures out at the mouths of the canal, not at Pump Station 6, all the way down where it enters into the lake. Those pumps were intended to be temporary by nature. They're not permanent pumps, and that's why the new permanent pump stations are being constructed.
That's why they're temporary.
They haven't failed yet. I mean, they've required a great deal of maintenance on a yearly basis, but none of our pumps have failed. We didn't turn any of those pumps on during this last rainfall event.
Hello, everyone. I'm State Representative Helena Moreno. I'm sorry that I'm getting to this event a little late, but the reason why I'm here is because obviously it's become very clear that we need more oversight, communication, and accountability when it comes to our issues regarding flooding. And I'm just here to say that I think it's maybe time to have more meetings like this, and even have Sewerage and Water Board meetings in council chambers, so that the public can be more aware of what is happening, and so that there is more transparency. And so I'm asking all of you all who are here today, I'm hoping that you will commit to have more meetings like this and continue to keep the public aware, so that we don't get blindsided again with particular problems. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Morrell, for putting this together too.
Today I spent a little bit of time talking about how we make sure that we're doing a good job of taking care of this new system that the Corps has built after Katrina. Primarily I focused on inspections, our inspection process, and really the inspection cycle, which starts with gathering the data in the field, bringing it in, having the engineers take a look at it, prioritizing items, assigning work orders to the field crews, getting the work done, and tracking that, and then once the work is completed, validating that with documentation, and then starting the cycle all over again.
I attend the Flood Authority meetings and have a pretty high interest in it since I live on the 17th Street Canal. And so I have a pretty good feel for the status of the flood protection system. But I just wanted to attend tonight just to see what new information I might pick up on.
And how do you feel regarding the level of protection now compared to previous years?
Oh, I'm very confident we've got a real good level of protection, and that includes what I'll call the tri-parish area on the East Bank, East Jefferson, Orleans, and St. Bernard Parish.
Oh, I think overall we're much better off than we were prior to Hurricane Katrina. The Corps has spent almost $14 billion improving the system, building new major structures throughout the system, and we're ready to go.
Your reaction to tonight's meeting?
I think it's a good news story. Let the people know all the work that's been done over the past 11, 12 years, and that the systems is in good shape, and we have a great relationship with our non-federal sponsor.
The flood defense system that they have now in the metro New Orleans area is the strongest it's ever been. It's one of the most robust in the world, and it's backed by a team of professionals who are dedicated, working 24/7 to keep them safe.
I'd like people to know that we are more prepared than ever. We have a great system. I'm very confident in its ability to stand up to a storm during an event, and we're ready for whatever Mother Nature may throw at us.
I'd keep in mind that when you talk about hurricane protection, flood preparedness, drainage, these are all kind of evolving problems. Obviously, as we lose more of the coast, become more vulnerable to hurricanes and flooding. As we do with climate change, we'll have more rain, but the purpose of government is to evolve with those challenges and continue to meet them, and that they'll see tonight that we have evolved since Katrina to fight hurricanes, and we'll continue to evolve to protect Southeast Louisiana.
The system is designed for a 100-year storm, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be 100%. We want to deliver the message that you still need to take care of yourself and protect yourself. And if the orders come in to evacuate the city, you have to evacuate the city.
If people have questions like more information about the Flood Protection Authority, what should they do?
They can go to our website at floodauthority.org.